The screen fades in on a small country town in New South Wales, Australia. Dust swirls across a sunlit road, children's laughter echoes from a nearby schoolyard, and among them is a boy who will change the way the world thinks about ability, determination, and courage. His name, Kurt Fearnley. Kurt was born in 1981 in the tiny town of Kokoda, population only a few hundred. His arrival into the world was not what his parents had expected. Doctors told the Fearnleys that their baby boy was born with sacral agenesis, a condition where his lower spine and parts of his pelvis had not formed. He would never walk. Some suggested his life might be limited. But Kokoda wasn't the sort of place to measure a person by limitations. His parents raised him with the belief that he wasn't fragile, that he wasn't to be hidden or pitied. He was simply Kurt, spirited, cheeky, and full of life. The first images of his childhood aren't of hospital beds or sadness, but of him crawling across the rough earth with a grin, racing his siblings in games of tag, determined never to be left behind. While other kids stood, Kurt's arms became his legs, his hands his stride. He built strength unknowingly, crawling miles over his lifetime just to keep up with his friends. At school, Kurt never wanted special treatment. He didn't see himself as different, though he knew the world sometimes did. He crawled around the classroom floors, across the playgrounds, sometimes scraping his hands and knees raw. But if there was a challenge, Kurt didn't shrink from it, he confronted it head-on. The Kokoda community embraced him. Neighbors, teachers, and friends rallied around, not in pity, but in encouragement. He was pushed into sports, into competition, into being part of every activity the other kids were in. And slowly, he discovered he wasn't weaker, he was simply different. His arms grew stronger than most, his determination sharper. There were whispers, of course. Some said he'd never live a normal life, never find work, never travel, never compete. Those whispers reached his ears, but instead of breaking him, they became fuel. As a teenager, Kurt's world opened further when he discovered wheelchair racing. Until then, he'd lived mostly within the boundaries of his small town. But the track gave him a taste of speed, of freedom, of flight. Sliding into his first racing chair felt awkward. The mechanics of pushing wheels instead of crawling were foreign. But when he leaned forward, gritted his teeth, and propelled himself down that track, he felt unstoppable. For the first time, he realized that sport wasn't about legs or disability, it was about heart, lungs, sweat, and willpower. It wasn't easy. The equipment was expensive, the training grueling. His family and community scraped together resources, helping however they could. Every training session left his arms aching, blistered, and bruised. But Kurt welcomed the pain, it was proof he was building something greater. Soon, he began entering races beyond Kokoda. Each competition meant travel, new cities, and new faces. He wasn't always the fastest at first, but he noticed something. The gap between him and the champions grew smaller each time. He was learning, adapting, sharpening. Kurt's competitive fire burned bright. He trained relentlessly, sometimes alone in the quiet country roads, sometimes in crowded stadiums with people watching. He faced defeats, but never saw them as failures, only as blueprints for improvement. He earned a place in national competitions, then international ones. The first time he wore the green and gold of Australia, he felt a surge of pride unlike anything before. Representing his country wasn't just about sport, it was about proving that disability was not destiny. His journey led him to his first Paralympic Games, the pinnacle of competition for athletes with disabilities. The sight of athletes from around the world, each carrying their own battles, triumphs, and scars, was humbling and electrifying. The stadium lights blazed, the crowd roared, and Kurt lined up at the starting line. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from anticipation. Years of crawling across dusty playgrounds, years of pushing through pain, years of refusing to be defined by his condition, all had led to this moment. The gun fired. The race began. Wheels spun, arms pumped, and Kurt surged forward. He wasn't just racing opponents, he was racing against every doubt ever cast upon him. Though victory wasn't immediate in those first games, the experience was transformative. He realized he belonged at this level. The Paralympics weren't the end of his story, they were the beginning. By the end of his first Paralympic campaign, Kurt wasn't a wide-eyed rookie anymore. He was an athlete with scars, with lessons, with a hunger that could not be extinguished. He returned to Australia more determined than ever to push his body to new limits. Karkor celebrated him not as a local boy who tried, but as a champion in the making. Kurt himself knew the road ahead would demand more than he had ever given. But he was ready. His spirit had been forged in struggle, his heart armored with resilience, and his arms strong enough to carry him into history. As the curtain closes on this first chapter of his life, the audience knows this is only the beginning. The boy who crawled across a playground is on his way to conquering the world's toughest tracks, marathons, and mountains. And in every mile he races, every blister he earns, he carries with him the spirit of Karkor, the love of his family, and the unshakable belief that courage is stronger than circumstance. Right. The roar of the crowd still rang in his ears long after his first Paralympic Games. Kurt returned to Australia no longer just the boy from Karkor, but an athlete with a new sense of belonging. The taste of international competition lit a fire in him. He had seen the best in the world, raced alongside them, and he knew deep inside that one day he would not just keep up, he would beat them. Every day became a test of will. He woke early, his arms already sore from the day before, yet he trained harder. He pushed along lonely country roads, sweat dripping from his brow, his gloves worn thin against the rims of his wheels. Each stroke was another brick laid in the foundation of greatness. He visualized the finish lines of marathons he had yet to run, the medals he had yet to win, the victories he had yet to claim. The world soon began to notice him. In marathons from Sydney to New York, Chicago to London, his name appeared again and again near the front of the pack. Wheelchair racing was unforgiving, athletes crashed, gloves tore, muscles screamed for rest, but Kurt thrived in the chaos. His arms pumped like pistons, his will stronger than the searing pain that often threatened to break him. In New York, one of the toughest marathon courses in the world, Kurt attacked the bridges and battled through the relentless winds. He crossed the finish line exhausted, elated, victorious. The boy who once crawled across playgrounds now rolled down Fifth Avenue as a champion of one of the world's greatest races. Victories piled up, each one a testament to the thousands of unseen hours he had invested. London fell to him, Chicago too. Each marathon became more than a race, it was proof that his body, though different, could achieve what others thought impossible. And yet, for all the glory, Kurt remained grounded. He still carried with him the values of Karkor, humility, hard work, and community. But racing was not his only test. Kurt hungered for challenges beyond the stadiums and city streets. He wanted to push himself into places few dared to go. That hunger led him to one of the most extraordinary feats of endurance and courage ever attempted, crawling the Kokoda Track. The Kokoda Track, deep in the jungles of Papua New Guinea, stretches 96 kilometers through mud, mountains, rivers, and dense rainforest. It is not a path for the weak. During World War II, Australian soldiers had fought and died on this track, carving their way through some of the harshest terrain on Earth. Many had crawled, wounded and broken, just to survive. Most people told Kurt it was madness. He could be carried, they suggested. He could be pushed in a specially designed chair. But Kurt refused. If the soldiers could crawl through Kokoda to defend their country, then he would crawl it to honor them. For 10 grueling days, he dragged his body through the jungle. His hands tore open on rocks, his arms burned from the strain, his body coated in mud and sweat. Each day the track tested him, tempting him to quit, whispering that he had gone far enough. But each day he answered back with another crawl forward. His mates walked beside him, carrying his pack, watching in awe as he refused to be carried even a single step. The jungle was relentless, but so was Kurt. He reached the end of Kokoda not as a passenger, but as a warrior who had conquered the impossible on his own terms. When he emerged, blooded and blistered, the world knew they were witnessing not just an athlete, but a man with unbreakable spirit. That same spirit carried him through Paralympic Games again and again. He lined up against the world's fastest wheelchair racers, the pressure heavier than ever, the stakes higher. Yet in those moments, Kurt was calm. He knew pain. He knew hardship. A race, no matter how fierce, could never defeat a man who had crawled the jungles of Papua New Guinea with nothing but his arms and his will. Gold medals came. Silver too. He heard his national anthem play in stadiums across the world, the Australian flag rising high, tears in his eyes as he realized he was no longer just representing his small town, but an entire nation. He was proving that disability did not mean inability. The years rolled on, and so did the victories. Marathon after marathon, championship after championship. But with each triumph, Kurt also faced setbacks. Injuries nagged him, sometimes threatening to end his career. There were races lost, moments of despair, times when doubt crept in like an unwelcome shadow. Yet every time he stumbled, he found the strength to rise again. What made Kurt different was not that he never fell, but that he never stayed down. His whole life had been a lesson in resilience. Every scar told a story, every medal a chapter, every blister a reminder that nothing worthwhile came without struggle. As his career reached its peak, Kurt became more than just an athlete. He became a symbol of courage, a beacon for others facing their own battles. He visited schools, met with young people with disabilities, and shared his story. He told them that strength was not in the legs or the arms, but in the heart. He told them that no dream was too far, no challenge too big. When he carried the Australian flag at the Commonwealth Games, leading his nation into the arena, it felt like the perfect symbol of everything he stood for. The boy who had once been doubted by doctors, who had crawled through schoolyards, who had fought for every inch on the track, now held his country's symbol high for the world to see. Kurt Fearnley had become a legend, not because of medals alone, but because of the way he lived, fearless, determined, compassionate. He had crawled through jungles, conquered the world's great marathons, stood atop podiums, and inspired millions. But even as the world celebrated his triumphs, Kurt knew his journey was not finished. There was still another chapter to write, a chapter not only about competition, but about legacy, about passing on what he had learned, about fighting for others to have the opportunities he had been given. And so, with arms still strong and spirit unbroken, he prepared to step into the next phase of his life, where his greatest victories would not be won on tracks or marathons, but in the hearts and futures of those who looked up to him. The cheers of stadiums eventually faded. The medals, though shining, gathered dust in display cases. For Kurt Fearnley, glory on the track was never meant to be the whole story. His life had always been bigger than the finish lines, bigger than the roar of the crowd. And as his racing career began to wind down, he discovered a new purpose that would test him in ways no marathon ever had. He had grown up being told that he might never do what other people did, that his life would be limited. But through sheer determination he had flipped that script, proving again and again that he could go further, faster, harder than anyone dared to imagine. Now he wanted to take that lesson beyond his own life. He wanted to fight for a world where children born with disabilities would not grow up hearing those same doubts. Kurt began speaking openly about the barriers that people with disabilities faced. Not just physical barriers of stairs and inaccessible spaces, but social barriers, expectations, prejudices, quiet doubts whispered in corners. He told audiences that ability was not measured by legs or arms, but by courage, by will, by heart. And when he spoke, people listened, because every word carried the weight of lived experience. His work as an advocate took him into schools, where children gathered wide-eyed to hear his stories. He knelt down to speak to them at their level, telling them about the boy from Karkor who crawled through playgrounds, about the races he won, about the jungle he conquered one blister at a time. The kids laughed, gasped, and clapped, but more importantly, they learned. They learned that difference was not weakness. They learned that disability was not something to fear, but something to embrace as part of the incredible diversity of the human spirit. He also worked with governments, pushing for greater inclusion, better accessibility, stronger rights for people with disabilities. He sat in meetings where policies were written, never afraid to remind leaders that behind every statistic was a human being who deserved dignity and opportunity. His advocacy was as fierce as his racing. The same fire that had driven him up hills and across finish lines now fueled his push for justice. But even in this new phase, he never completely left the track behind. He continued to race, sometimes in smaller events, sometimes just for the love of competition. Every time he pushed his chair forward, He felt that same rush of freedom that had hooked him as a teenager. He no longer raced to prove himself, he had already done that 1,000 times over. Now he raced simply because he loved it, because movement was joy, because the road ahead still called his name. His legacy grew. He became a mentor to younger athletes, offering advice not just about training or racing, but about life. He told them that sport was not just about medals, but about resilience, about showing up, about refusing to be defined by anyone else's expectations. Many of those athletes went on to achieve greatness of their own, carrying a piece of Kurt's spirit with them onto their own starting lines. At home, Kurt's life was filled with love. His family grounded him, reminded him of what truly mattered. With them, he was not a champion or an icon, but simply a husband, a father, a son, a friend. They were his anchor, his reason to keep pushing, his reminder that victories are sweetest when shared with the people you love. There were moments when he looked back on everything he had done, the medals, the marathons, the Kokoda Crawl, the speeches, the advocacy, and felt overwhelmed. It had been a long road, filled with pain and triumph, with doubt and courage. But every step, every push, every crawl had been worth it. Because he had lived not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been told they couldn't. In time, Kurt officially retired from professional racing. It was a bittersweet moment, stepping away from the track that had defined so much of his life. But he did so with no regrets. He had given everything he had, and then some. He had left nothing in reserve. And though he would no longer chase medals, he knew his greatest race was still ahead, the race to build a more inclusive world. That race has no finish line. It is fought every day in classrooms, in boardrooms, in communities, in families. It is fought in the way we choose to see one another, the way we choose to lift one another up instead of holding one another back. And in that race, Kurt Fearnley remains at the front of the pack, leading with courage, with compassion, with unshakable belief in the power of human resilience. Years from now, when people speak of him, they will not only recall the medals or the marathons. They will remember the boy who crawled through life's toughest terrains, who never let the world define his limits, who turned every doubt into fuel and every setback into strength. They will remember the man who carried a nation's flag, who carried hope into countless hearts, who carried the message that courage is stronger than circumstance. The story of Kurt Fearnley is not just about sport. It is about what it means to be human. It is about refusing to accept the limits others set for you. It is about standing, or in Kurt's case, rolling and crawling tall in the face of every obstacle. It is about legacy, about leaving the world better than you found it. And so his journey continues, not on the tracks of London or New York, not in the jungles of Papua New Guinea, but in the lives of everyone he has touched, everyone who dares to dream because they saw him dream first. The curtain falls on his athletic career, but the light on his story only grows brighter. Because Kurt Fearnley is not just an athlete. He is not just an advocate. He is a reminder to us all that strength is not measured in muscle, but in spirit, that greatness is not found in medals, but in resilience, and that the true heart of a champion beats for others.